Thank you everyone for coming today. Welcome. This is part 2 of our delegate training series. Today we're covering how to run and win your delegate election. I'm Lisa. I'm one of the 2 staff organizers for UAWD. I'm a former member of UAW Local 5118 Harvard Graduate Students Union. I'm going to be co-running this training along with Nathan. Nathan, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Nathan, also the other staff organizer at UAWD and a former member of Local 2110 in New York. And welcome everyone, great to be here.
The materials today on how to run and win local union election are based on decades of experience from the Teamsters. Some of the material is from Teamsters for Democratic Union. We also incorporated a lot of experience from UAW members who run for and won their delegate elections, who've been to convention many times, people like Scott. Welcome to people who just got here. Please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. A couple more things I'll say before we begin. So this is, we're doing these trainings, but running for delegate can be a big task in some locals, in a lot of locals, and we're here to support you. So there's myself and Nathan, but also a lot of other UAWD members who have experience running for delegate and can help coach or guide you through the process as nominations and elections are coming up. So if you are interested in receiving more guidance, please let us know. Just say so in the chat or send us a message and we'll be in touch. We'll be in touch with everyone regardless, but we definitely want to hear from you if you're interested. And the last thing is we're collecting feedback on these trainings. So one of us will be sending you a feedback form to fill out at some point after the training. So thanks again for making it today. I'm going to start the presentation. All right, so as I said at the beginning, this is part 2 of our delegate training series, how to run and win your delegate election. So what we're covering today, we'll briefly do an exercise related to the timeline for a union election or a delegate election campaign. Then we'll talk about how to get started and how to build your campaign team. Then we'll talk about how do you actually persuade and identify people who are going to vote for you. And then lastly, we'll talk about getting out the vote when it's closer to the election date and how to deal with any attacks you might face on the campaign trail. Okay, so part 1, campaign timeline. So one thing we're going to talk about today is pulling together a slate. If you're in a local that sends more than one delegate to convention, which I think is most, though not all locals, we really encourage you to find someone else to run with on a slate or as a group or just to coordinate. Declare your slate, successfully nominate yourself, identify your supporters. We'll talk about how to do that. Get your name out there. Some very practical things like scheduling vacation time if you need it in order to campaign, develop a platform, recruiting a campaign team bigger than just yourself and your slate. That's very important. Other things, you might need to raise money to print literature and mailers, depending on what your plan is, your campaign plan. Build your supporter list, take photos of your slate members. Remind your supporters to vote, spend a lot of time talking to people, calling them, texting them. The punchline here is that you need to start campaigning now. Even if the nominations deadline hasn't been announced, even if the election schedule hasn't been announced, it's really not too early to start campaigning. If nominations and elections are actually coming up soon and you feel short on time, don't worry, just do as many of these steps as you can. To win, you don't need to be perfect. You just need to be better than your opponent. And like I said in the beginning, we're here to help you. We have a group of people who have had a lot of experience running for election in their local. Whether you're a first-time candidate or whether you've done it before and you want some more help, just feel free to reach out to us. Nathan and I will both drop our contact information in the chat during the training if you don't already have it. With that, I'll pass it over to Nathan.
Great. Yeah, thanks so much. All right, so I'm going to talk about getting started. If we could move on to the next slide. So there are a few important things to do when you're thinking about starting a campaign. And the first one is to ask questions. I think one of the most important foundations of a strong campaign is knowledge. And if you don't know about your local, you don't know about how things work there, who's voting, what the issues are, it's going to be really hard for you to run a strong campaign. So here's some questions we think are important. And they're obviously going to be more, but we just want to provide these as a place to start. How many coworkers do you have? How many departments? What are they? Who works at your local or your unit? Are there patterns to who's a member along the lines of race or gender, nationality, language, tiers, age? And are there issues that differ depending on these different groups? Those are all important questions to ask. And, just what issues are there that are most important in your workplace? It's also worth asking some political questions, like who is likely to support you and who's likely to oppose you. People said this one, like who's in leadership, maybe who ran for delegate before, what were their positions, what did they stand for, and what was their relationship with the administration caucus. There's been a corrupt caucus that's run our union for over 70 years, and it's important to know how they fit into things at your local. So that's an important question to ask. It's also important to know how do your fellow members feel about the current leadership. That's going to affect how you campaign. And yeah, I think this one was said, but how many people voted, that'll give you a sense of how many people you're going to need to win over in order to win your election. It's also good to ask, well, how do people campaign in your local? Like if no one has ever paid for a mailer before, maybe if you did that, people would think that, you have too much money and that could backfire. So it's important to think about how people have campaigned and make decisions about how you're going to campaign accordingly. And then finally, I know Ron is big on this, and this is really important. When are nominations due? If you have to make them or for accepting your nomination, if it's made automatically, and when is your election? Those are two questions everyone here should know the answer to. If you don't know the answer to it, it's okay. I would get in touch with your local leadership right away and start to ask for answers to those questions, because you do not want to miss the nomination window. Sometimes that can be short and people have missed that slot even though they wanted to run. So don't be one of those people and start to ask. All right, so yeah, these are important questions to ask. Ron made a good point. If you have a lot of non-English speakers, you might want to find a translator. So yeah, that's a great example of how knowing the answer to these questions sets you up for a strong campaign. So be curious and try to start learning about your local. But there's some ways to answer these questions with help from others, so you're not alone. All right, so there's some lessons here. One is find a mentor. So that's someone who's been around a little longer than you. They're knowledgeable about the politics at your local, and maybe they have some experience campaigning ideally. So you're gonna be in a much stronger position for just learning about what it's going to take to run, and also starting to build a campaign if you have someone who you trust, who's knowledgeable, who you can get advice from. So it's really important to be on the lookout for someone, and just mention to them, I'm thinking about running and I want to ask you some questions. I think a lot of people will, they'll really like that you asked, and they'll be happy to share what they know with you. So the second lesson is always be talking to your coworkers. These questions can really only be answered with information from other people, and you need to get a lot of different answers to make sure that your answers are reliable. So you need to start talking to a lot of people, and talking to a lot of people, that's the foundation of campaigning, is getting your name out there, your issues out there, and being familiar and respected by your coworkers. So you can both learn about answer these questions that you really need to know the answers to and start campaigning at the same time. So I would encourage you to start talking to your coworkers and let them know that you're interested in running, and just ask them questions about what issues are important to them, or if they're knowledgeable, ask them questions about the local, who's run before, things like that. Can learn a lot. The third lesson, we're going to talk a lot more about this in a second, but the third lesson is don't be a lone ranger. So one of the most important things to ask is, who can join my campaign or my slate? And, the main thing to remember here is, if you campaign by yourself, there is a good chance you will lose. If you are isolated, if there's no one helping you, if there's no one that's thinking through these questions with you, it is going to be a lot harder for you to win. So the most important thing is to start building your team and think about, who can I get involved? And we're going to talk a lot about that for the rest of this section. If we can go to the next slide. This slide is about an idea called the bullseye. And the bullseye is just a metaphor, but it's a helpful way to think about your team and your campaign and the different kinds of people that will go into your campaign. So at the center of the bullseye here is what we call the core. That's you. Those are the people that are waking up every day and they're thinking, how are we going to win? How are we going to grow the campaign? So that's you. That's maybe some of your most dedicated strategists, people that you talk to regularly, who are meeting with you, talking about how we can grow the campaign. And those are also people you're running with, people maybe who are on your slate, like Lisa is talking about. We'll talk more about your slate in a minute. So that's the core. And if we go a little bit out, we get a little less involved, but every layer of the bullseye is still important. So you can't just have a core. You also need your activists. So your activists are people who, they might not be waking up every day thinking about how you're going to win, but they're invested in your campaign, they're supporting you, and they're taking action. That's the key thing, is they're taking action. So those are people who, when you give them a call once a week about leafleting, they're going to join you, for example. Or maybe they're a little less involved, but they're going to, let's say you're going to do a big fundraiser. Maybe they're going to help with the fundraiser and cook food for people who are coming to your fundraiser. So those are people who are taking action to advance your campaign. So as we get a little less involved, we get to your supporters. Those are people who you know for sure are going to vote for you. And those are really important. You probably can't win just with activists and core supporters. You need your supporters who are going to vote for you. Maybe they're a little less involved, but that's still really important, because you need people who are going to vote for you. And they might do things like publicly demonstrate their support. Even if they're not leafleting, maybe they'll wear a pin, or maybe they will wear a t-shirt if you have a t-shirt, or maybe they'll endorse you. So it's important to think about how to get them more engaged, and we'll talk about growing each layer of the bullseye in the next section. But finally, I do want to say that there also are disengaged people. Those are people who maybe are going to vote, maybe they're not. Maybe they don't even know the election's coming up. It's important that we turn those people into supporters. We turn supporters into activists, and activists into your core. So we're trying to move people towards the center of the bullseye. So as I was saying, the idea of the bullseye is we want to move people towards the center. So we want to get people more and more involved. You want to get your disengaged people to become your voters. You want to get your voters to become your activists, and your activists to get as many of those people really invested and thinking day and night about how we're going to win this campaign. So the way in which you grow the bullseye is by asking people to do things. It's through action that we grow a campaign. That's the key, is getting people to do things big and small. So let's say we want to get a voter or a supporter to become more of an activist, to become someone who's taking action to advance the campaign and get your slate elected. What are some things you could ask a voter to do that would help build the campaign and get us closer to victory? And here's just a few for you to think about. So yeah, campaign at their work site, if it's different than yours, especially distributing surveys. So maybe, you know what, Justin is here and Justin was distributing a survey to find out what his coworkers cared about. So that's a great thing to do early in the campaign. That's a really good one. Literature, I think Patricia said that. And you could have an issue petition as well. So selling raffle tickets, raising money, if you have to campaign and you need to raise some money to do so, let's say to pay for literature, and you have a bigger local, you need to raise a decent chunk of change, you should definitely get people involved. There are a lot of activities like selling raffle tickets or holding, a fundraising party. There are lots of things that go into that. It's a good way to get people involved. Here's a small one. Some people aren't going to be up to pass out literature, but they will be in a picture for your literature, or they might give you an endorsement. Or maybe here's a small one. Maybe there's someone who goes to every union meeting and that's all they do. Maybe they can nominate you. So I think it's important to think about the different ways that you can get different kinds of people involved. And there are a bunch of tips for how to think through how to ask people to do a particular thing at a particular time. And if we go to the next slide, we can go over some of those tips for asking people to get more involved. So the key thing when you're asking people to get involved is to think about the fact that everyone in this meeting is kind of special. Very few people in the union are going to take their afternoon when they're not at work to go to a meeting and learn about how to run for office or honestly anything else. Other than maybe when the contract fights come around. That will definitely get people interested. So most people aren't like us in this Zoom room. And that's a reality, but we want to get people more involved. We want to make them more like us, but we start from that understanding that most people are busy. So the first thing is don't overwhelm people. So, if someone is just a voter, you might not want to ask them right away to come to your weekly campaign meeting if you have that, or to, come and pass out tons of literature at the plant gates one morning. It might be good to ask them to do a smaller thing first, like, wear a pin or endorse you and give you like 2 sentences about why people should vote for you, or fill out a survey like the one that Justin is circulating. So start small and get them gradually more involved with a bigger and bigger task once you know that they'll do that first small thing. So the second thing is to get feedback. Once you do get people involved, you want to ask people, well, how do you think this is going? If they come to a leafleting event, ask them, what could we do to make it better next time? If people are taking the time to campaign for you and with you, we really want to get their ideas, because that's how we show that they're important, and that's how we make the campaign better. And kind of related to that is saying thank you. People are taking time out of their week to get the word out about your campaign, and that's something that is really important, really meaningful, and it's a sacrifice. So we want to let people know that we appreciate them. And it can be nice to do, social events, go out for something to eat, hang out for a little bit after you do something like leafleting, just to show that you appreciate someone and your team. So that's important. And then the final thing is don't write people off. So people are busy, and maybe there's something going on in someone's life where they can't campaign for you now. That doesn't mean they don't support you. That doesn't mean they'll never be involved. But you might want to think about, well, why didn't they say yes? And you might want to wait a little bit and go back to them, maybe with a different ask that you think is likely to get them involved. And Ron says, ask if you can always ask someone to spread your message by text, or as Tim said, over Facebook. That's a good way to campaign. It's also important to think about who they know when you're campaigning, because through our supporters we can reach way more people than we can just as a small group. Okay, so I said I was going to get back to the question of slates. So slates are basically who's on your team of candidates, who is running. Now, it could be just a slate of delegate candidates, or you might be running as part of a slate. If there are local officer elections, you might be part of a slate that's running for those as well. But In some local slates, kind of the word slate has a bad rap these days. I've heard that from various people, but the key thing is that you're working as a team and helping one another. That's the most important thing, whether or not you call it a slate. People are putting some good campaigning ideas in the chat, by the way, and we'll get to some more of those in the next section. But yeah, so the key thing is that you have a team that's working together. And when you're thinking about who should run and who should be on a slate and be on that team, there's some really important things to keep in mind. And we've tried to boil them down to 6. So the first thing is they have the respect of their coworkers. This is going to sound a little bit cold, but you want to make sure that if someone's running with you, that they're respected. You don't want to run with someone who is disliked by most people or even a lot of people. It's going to set you up to lose, unfortunately. So try to run with people who have the respect of their coworkers. That doesn't mean you need to run with the most fun or the most popular people, but you need to run with people who ideally, when it comes to fighting the boss, when it comes to understanding the union, needs to be someone who has the trust of your coworkers. So the second thing is they need to be prepared. They need to care about reform, and they need to be prepared to stand up to corruption in the administration caucus. That's incredibly important because when we get to convention, we want to make sure that people, have some backbone and they're ready to stand up when there's some pressure put on them to nominate good candidates for the IEB and to push for the kinds of resolutions that we need to push for. So that's really important. The third thing is they need to be prepared to work hard and share the load. So campaigning is a lot of work, and you don't want to be the only person on your slate who's actually doing the hard work. So make sure that there's an understanding that you're going to work as a team. Now, number 4 is really important. So your slate should be representative of the local. It should include every important group. So whether we're talking gender, race, shift, tier, those are all really important. If you don't include groups that are decent size in your local, you're going to get attacked by the opposition, and people are going to feel left out, and it's going to make things a lot harder. So it's better to include everyone. And, that can be hard. So you might look for candidates and you might not find all the important groups to run as your slate, but the key thing is to try, and you'll have a stronger campaign for trying. The 5th thing is don't divide your side. So don't split the vote. If you have 2 groups of reformers who more or less agree on the issues and they're both running, and let's say there are 2 positions and we have one reformer group with 2 people, another reformer group with 2 people, and 2 administration caucus candidates, guess who's going to win? The administration caucus. So if you agree with some coworkers who are running for delegate, try to work together with them, try to have them on your slate and work together. That's really important. You don't want to split your vote. And number 6 is, to figure out who you can run on a slate with, you need to figure out what you agree with. You want to make sure you agree at least about the most important things. So we have a recommended platform with UAWD's vision for what's important going into convention. These are recommendations for you. You can work with us. If you don't agree with every last thing on there, or you're thinking you want to run on some of them, we would still love to work with you, but this might be a helpful place to go to get a sense of, well, what are the core issues that we need to make sure we agree on? All right, so hopefully that gives you some idea about how to start forming your slate, your group of candidates who are going to work together.
Okay, so that was a lot of great information about how to get started and start building a campaign team and slate. So once you have that together, the next step is to start persuading and identifying the people who are actually going to vote for you. So that's what this section is about. So a common mistake, you can make at this point is to campaign at the last minute. How many times have you seen someone campaign only at the last minute and lose? We really want to start persuading and identifying who's going to vote for us long before voting begins. Then when we are actually going back to people to remind them to vote, we know we're turning out our supporters and people who will vote for us. Another reason why we actually want to start doing this early is because we want to talk to them before our opponents do. Sometimes people pledge their vote to the first person who talks to them. So, there are many advantages to starting your campaigning early. And one other thing to say is this section is about encouraging you to be systematic as well in reaching out to voters. So we'll talk about that. Um, okay, how do you actually ask people to vote for you? You actually should do it in person, if possible, individually. The simplest way to get someone to vote for you is to ask them. To do this, you need to listen. So you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. You should be using them in that proportion when you're talking to your coworkers. You should prepare a rap. This is like a short explanation about why you're running and what you plan to do, what your platform is. Should be 30 seconds. And we're going to be talking more about a rap and practicing one, actually. And then you need to make the ask. Look them in the eye and ask, can I count on your vote? It's easy. I know this from experience. It's easy to have a whole great conversation with someone and then you kind of wiggle away and don't actually ask them to do the thing you really need them to do, which is to vote for you. So make sure you do that. The photo here is actually of a UAWD member, Jose Estrada Perez, while he was campaigning during the one member, one vote referendum. He went around and talked to everyone, all of his coworkers in his local. And, that's the kind of campaigning we need to do when we're running for delegate. Let's see. Okay. Before you go around and start talking to people, though, you need to identify the issues that you're campaigning on. And the best issues are going to be deeply and widely felt in your workplace by your coworkers. So in addition to talking and listening, putting out a survey is a great idea. As we've mentioned already, you can do this online through Facebook. I know Justin made like a Google form survey. You can text it around to people. You can also make a paper survey and hand it out. Another thing that UAWD put together that we hope is helpful is the UAWD Delegate platform, which is now up on the website. The URL is uawd.org/delegate platform. We can put that into the chat. And it's based on input from a lot of UAWD members and also our own poll that we put out, which hundreds of UAW members filled out. You can read it when you get a second. Some of the top issues were corruption, getting rid of tiers, improving pay, but there are a lot of other things as well. So when you go around talking to your coworkers, when you are saying your 30-second rap, you should adjust or connect it to the person you're talking to. If you're talking to a tier 2 worker, you might want to say an important part of my platform is getting rid of tiers, but while staying honest, of course. So I'm going to stop here just to see if there are any questions about, coming up with a platform or, canvassing your workplace. We have a few more things to go over before we get to the exercise. So one fun part of campaigning that is also important is developing campaign literature. So we wanted to show you a few examples and also give a few tips. I also know this from experience. There is a sort of temptation to cram as much information as possible on a given flyer. Sometimes people are in the mood to read a lot. A lot of times they're not. So we encourage you to develop a few flyers that are eye-catching and that convey the most important information. So on the left, we have a delegate campaign flyer from Local 909, a few UAWD members, right? I think it's from the 80s sometime. So you'll notice they have a few platform planks at the top. very short, just 3 things. Direct elections, which we finally won in the UAW, jobs, not concessions, and a detailed convention report. They're actually going to report back to the membership about what happens at convention, which is not something most delegates promise. It has photos of the people running on the slate together, and actually the numbers they're gonna appear next to their names on the ballot. And it has the election dates. So very important to actually put the date of the election on the ballot. On the right-hand side, or sorry, on the flyer. On the right-hand side, we have an example from the Teamsters, a slate called Members for Members, representing a local in the San Diego area. And it's very similar. This was just from this past year, I believe. Campaigning on no more concessions and sellouts, respect contract votes. So they have an issue in their union where the international union overruled a majority vote to reject a contract, and to nominate new international leaders, because as is going to continue to be the case in the UAW, delegates to their convention nominate leaders, although their members also have direct elections. And yeah, the ballot, well, in their case, the ballots are being mailed, but the mail date is right at the top. So yeah, Martha is saying a lot of members appreciate a thought-provoking leaflet. So, yeah, there are different approaches you could take. And we just wanted to provide a few examples. Okay, so this is very important. Building your supporter list. When you're walking the plant or your workplace, and you find a supporter, don't let them get away without taking down their contact information, taking down their name, because chances are you might not have met them before. Their name, their phone number, their email address, as well as any other important details like their shift, the department they work in, whether they're a temp or what tier they are. This is crucial because you need to go back to these people you've talked to and remind them to vote if they support you. If they don't support you, you don't need to send them a reminder. You also want to include your assessment of them. Track whether, how did the conversation go? Did they seem like a strong supporter, weak supporter? Did they seem pretty undecided or sort of non-committal? Were they actually opposed? They tell you they're actually voting for your opponent. That's important information to know. So there are different ways of recording this information. You can do it in a notebook as you're walking around. You can put that information later into a spreadsheet, or you could enter it into your phone directly. The most important thing is you do it in a format where you can systematically keep track of all this information. We can go back and again easily contact them when it's time to vote. And Nathan's going to talk later about getting out the vote closer to when polls open. Okay. So here's an example of what a supporter list might look like. So you have the name of every worker, their email address, their phone number, their location in your workplace. It could be department that they work in, the shift that they work, and your assessment of their level of support. So here we have a strong supporter. So you want to take note of strong supporters, because there are people who you could get to become activists for your campaign. So you want to, Nathan was saying, keep growing the bullseye as you're canvassing your coworkers in the plant or your workplace. And then, there's someone who's undecided and then someone who's actually opposed. So Ron has a good tip in the chat. If they feel uncomfortable giving you their phone number, ask for their email address. If they won't give you anything, leave them your phone number or email address, so they have a way of getting in touch with you. So yeah, leave them your information either way. And Brian has a really insightful comment. It's interesting how working for delegate votes looks so much like working a union organizing drive. And that's because there are really common principles of organizing that apply to so many different activities that we do, whether it's organizing a new union, organizing a strike, organizing to win your election. There are a lot of commonalities. So, even if you don't end up running for delegate, or even if you do run, these skills are definitely going to be helpful to other areas of organizing as a union activist. So we're going to go back to an example of the 30-second wrap that you would be giving as you walk around and talk to your coworkers. So this one says, I'm running to be a delegate to the UAW Constitutional Convention. I would also say the Special Bargaining Convention, because I'm fed up with leadership that is not accountable to members like us. If I get elected delegate, I'll stand up against corruption and fight for things we care about, like ending tiers and reversing concessions on COLA and pensions. But I'll also report back to you after each convention so you know I followed through on my promise. Can I count on your vote? Great. Can I have your phone number so I can keep you updated about the election? So, your conversation is not necessarily going to follow a script. There's going to be back and forth, hopefully, as a conversation. But I just want to point out a few things about this wrap that help make it effective. So the beginning, I didn't say this, but you should definitely say your name, maybe introduce which part of the workplace you're from. Hi, I'm Lisa. I'm a tier 2 worker in, X department on A crew. Definitely introduce yourself, explain what you're running for. People might have questions about what convention is and what a delegate does. I would definitely expect that if I were running in my local. And then you explain what's in your platform in a very sort of concise way. You might end up talking about which issues resonate with them. And then the third thing this wrap does is it actually asks the person you're talking to for their vote. Again, it's really easy to kind of forget to do it or get to a point where you feel a little uncomfortable and you're like, I feel a little nervous asking them. But it's really important that you do that, unless you're getting a very clear sense from them that they're voting for your opponent. And then the last thing, which is really important not to forget, again, is the contact information. Ask them for their phone number. If they're not willing to give that, their email. And, as Ron was saying, if they're not willing to give you your contact information, leave yours with them.
But it's also okay to not know the answers to everything. And what's key there is to admit when you don't know something and say, you know what, I'm going to need to get back to you on that, and then actually follow up with the answer. So I just want to say that because not everyone who runs is going to be doing it as long as Scott has, and that's okay. As long as you know your platform and you prepare and you can speak from experience convincingly, it's okay if you don't know everything.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Nathan. Yeah, another thing you wrote in the chat that I liked was Scott, I think was a good listener. And and I remember that part from the presentation about, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so you should be listening and speaking in that proportion, roughly. It's easy to just keep rambling and, kind of bulldoze over the person you're trying to convince to vote for you. Okay.
All right. Thank you, Lisa. Okay, so we're going to talk about getting out the vote. We just talked about what some people call persuasion, that's an identifying your supporters. And now we're going to talk about getting out the vote, which is the final stretch of your campaigns. When you've been identifying your supporters, you've been talking to people, you've been building your list, And now voting is going to begin. Maybe, in a day or so, the polls are going to open. People will be casting their votes, or maybe they're about to get their ballots in the mail if your local votes by mail. So what should you do differently now that voting is about to begin? How is this part of the campaign going to differ from all the parts of the campaign that went before? There's one really important difference.
Get your voters to the polls.
That's right. Get your voters to the polls. For the most part, once voting is about to begin, the whole focus of your campaign shifts. You are mostly done, and there's a little exception to that, but you are mostly done trying to win people over. And your whole focus shifts, and now you're going to prioritize your known supporters. These are people that hopefully you got their contact information. These are people, hopefully you wrote their names down, you know where they are, you know how to reach them, and they've told you, yes, Scott, yes, Lisa, I'm going to vote for you. You have my vote. So now what we're going to do is we are going to go back to those people, and as Scott says, we are going to make sure they get to the polls. And we're also, this also means you're going to ignore hostile voters and maybe ignore voters who you haven't talked to yet or who are still on the fence. Now, the reason I said that there's an exception is this. If you don't have enough supporters, if you're heading into voting and you don't have enough supporters, you still want to make sure the supporters you do have vote. But if you're finding that your persuasion conversations, those conversations you're having for the first time, where you're just trying to get someone, or maybe the second time you're going back to someone and just trying to convince them to vote for you, if you're finding that those conversations are yielding good results, you're still getting more supporters, and you don't have enough supporters to win, that's okay. You might want to continue those conversations. But overall, the focus shifts from finding more supporters to getting the supporters you do have to the polls. So that's the concept. That's the idea behind Get Out the Vote. And it's really important to focus on your people in the final stretch of the campaign. So if you take anything from this section with you, take that with you. But yeah, there are a few things that go into this. There are a few ways to focus on your supporters and make sure they vote. And if we can go to the next slide, we'll talk about two main types of things you can do. So the first is called visibility. This is putting up signs. I was hearing in local 1700, they have barbecues, they have cookouts in the parking lot, and people drink. Sounds like a lot of fun. Not every local does that, but maybe some locals do that. I heard another local, people have people with trucks put signs all over their truck about a particular candidate. People might wear t-shirts, people might send a mailer. So these are all things that make your campaign look exciting. They make it look like you have a lot of supporters. They get your name and your face, or the names and faces of your slate, at the front of people's minds. So, you want to vote for someone's campaign where you feel like there's momentum and there's energy. And that's what visibility does. All these different activities are making you look visible. Now, sometimes people make a big mistake and Get Out the Vote, and they only pay attention to visibility, and they don't pay attention to what I'm calling canvassing here. And the idea behind canvassing is systematically checking. So that means going one by one with all the supporters that you've written down in a spreadsheet or on your phone or on a piece of paper, and making sure those people vote, whether that means texting them, calling them, finding them in person, in the workplace, any of these things. What matters is that you cross them off the list when they've said, yes, I voted. Hopefully they voted for you. But once they say that they voted, you can cross them off and focus on other people. So it's really important that you do both of these activities: canvassing, systematically making sure people vote on an individual by individual basis, and visibility, making your campaign look exciting. And the bigger the local, I think sometimes the more visibility there is, but it's important to at least find some small way to appear visible and make it clear that you have support and momentum. So canvassing, the tactics there are phone banking, text banking, and in-person conversation. Visibility, there are many different tactics. We're not going to talk about all of them here. Those are the kinds of things where Lisa and I are here to talk through, and other experienced UAWD activists, we can give you advice on any of these ideas and tactics when the time comes. So we do want to say one thing about get out the vote. So it is a really hectic time in a campaign. You're trying, let's say you're having one of these barbecues, or you're doing a bunch of phone banks or text banks with a bunch of people all at once. There's a lot to do to prepare. Like Ron was saying, you know, if it's the day of the count, you're going to have a challenger there potentially. So there's a lot that needs to fall into place. So it's important that you prepare. And this means a couple things. It's good to meet with your team a week or two in advance and make sure everyone has their role. Everyone knows what they're doing. Maybe Lisa's leading the phone bank and Ron is gonna do the barbecue. And then Ron knows all the people who are bringing the supplies. So it's important that everyone knows their role and their task. Otherwise, it's probably not gonna go according to plan and it's gonna be stressful. So it's important to meet. It's important that everyone knows their role. It's important that you have a way to communicate with one another. And then get out the vote will be fun. And it really can be a fun end to a campaign, but if you don't plan, it will be stressful. So make sure to plan. All right. So this is the least fun section of the entire training, but it's important to talk about. And it's dealing with attacks. It's not simple. Campaigns are never simple. Things always happen. Things always come up. And one of them is there's a decent chance that you could be attacked on the campaign trail. Often this happens at the end of a campaign because it can be uncomfortable to attack your opponents and then have a lot of bad blood throughout the whole campaign. So oftentimes this happens towards the end. Oftentimes, you know, these are whispers and rumors that get spread also. Think about how to respond. So there are a few key things to think about. So the first is called inoculation. So this is kind of like a vaccine. You know, one way to prevent or to be strong in the face of attacks is to prepare your team if you expect to be attacked, and share that information first in a way that you get to present, you get to control how that information is presented. So just like a vaccine contains a little bit of a dead virus, you're giving a little bit of the dead attack, so to speak, to your campaign. So for instance, you know, Jansen in his situation could share with the supporters, you know, he could say, you know, I might expect to get attacked because I stood on the side of what I thought was right during the Black Lives Matter protests. And maybe you might want to say that to your core team if you expect to be attacked. You don't necessarily need to tell everyone, but sometimes it's helpful to share a little bit of information about yourself if you think it might be the basis for an attack, and present it in a more positive light. The second thing to do is stay calm. I mean, part of why we're telling you this is, you know, this is something that might happen. It's important to, you know, it's normal to feel a certain way when you're attacked, but it's important to let yourself feel whatever feelings you're having, and then let yourself cool off, let those emotions fade a little bit, and then think about how you want to respond in a cool and collected way. And then you're going to make a much more strategic response that's good for your campaign. Oftentimes they want to get under your skin. They want to provoke you into saying and things and acting in a way that makes you look bad. So don't let them do that. The best way to get revenge when you're attacked is to win. And that's what we want to do here. The third thing is you need to assess how to respond based on the severity of the attack. So if the attack is minor, it probably can be ignored. If it's not catching on, if it's not alleging anything very serious, don't want to give it more attention. You want to focus on your positive message. But if it's something that's really serious, like I think the attacks that were mentioned are serious enough that they did need to be addressed in some way, it's best to respond decisively. That means one time you want to think about your response, you want it to be convincing, you want to get the word out about your response if you need to, and then move on. Don't keep talking about the attack forever. Get back to your positive message. If anyone ever brings it up, you can say, look, I responded to it. Here's the Facebook post, or here is the leaflet I made responding to it. Share it and then move on to your positive message. Don't keep, you know, fueling the flames of the attack that someone made on you. So those are our 3 tips. for how to respond. The most important thing is to go back to the don't be a lone ranger. These attacks, things that are hard in a campaign, they're going to be a lot easier to deal with if you have a team. And if you have a team, there are stressful moments in a campaign, but overall campaigning is fun. It's a way to talk to people, build solidarity with your fellow unionists, and it will be a rewarding experience. So just remember, if you've built a strong campaign, attacks are something that you can be prepared for, and they're just a bump in the road, and you will have a successful campaign and will be a rewarding experience. All
I have
right.
a campaign
Oh, go ahead,
tip
Ron.
to
Go
add,
ahead.
which is, I don't think anybody's brought up thank you leaflets following the election. It can really help you for future elections. If win or lose, you put out a very simple leaflet that says in big letters, people do this in my local, that says thank you. And then the body of the leaflet just says, I'd like to thank everyone who voted for me and everybody who came out to vote, because that makes union democracy stronger. Get in touch with me if you want to talk about how to make our union more democratic and stronger. And then that's one last chance to give your name and phone number and email address. And that'll be the last leaflet they see. So look at it not as the last leaflet of that campaign, but the first leaflet of your next campaign.
That's such a good idea, Ron. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I think it's important. You know, we did mention it's important to thank people who are volunteering, but I think, yeah, thanking the voters and making it clear you're invested in your local for the long haul. That's a really important thing to do. But if you do think of any questions or there's anything that comes to mind, we are here for you. Me and Lisa are going to follow up with everyone here. We also have a bunch of other experienced activists like Ron, like Scott, like the rest of our steering committee who are not on the call, like Martha, who I think was on the call. So we have a lot of people who've ran and they've won local office or they've been elected delegate. Yeah, so we have a lot of experienced people who can offer advice. So please get in touch with me or Lisa. We would love to talk you through any particular challenge or question that you have when you're on the campaign trail. One thing that makes this possible is having a caucus, having a group like UAWD that is there to build power and share this knowledge for the long haul. So if you are interested and you are not yet a member, we would really encourage you to become one. You can go to uawd.org/join. I'll put it in the chat in 1 second. Membership is only $25 a month, and anyone who is a UAW member in good standing is welcome to join.
$25 a year.
Sorry, a
Nathan.
year.
Yeah.
Sorry, thinking about monthly contributions a year. So it is very affordable, $25 a year. And you are all invited to join. Thank you for the correction. Yeah, we would love to stay in touch and support you however we can in your delegate elections. And yeah, thank you so much for coming to this training.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. We did cover a lot of material between Scott's presentation yesterday and today's presentation. And like Nathan said, there's really like not a substitute for sort of, you know, one-on-one mentorship and coaching. So so please reach out. Nathan works with the locals in Michigan and 9A, and if you're not in Michigan or Region 9A, I'm the staff organizer you should talk to. But we'll connect you also with other UAWD members who have a lot of experience with campaigning.
All right, bye everyone. Good luck out there.